You probably saw the news. Congress just passed a massive spending bill worth over $1.2 trillion. The headlines were everywhere for about 5 minutes, and then everyone moved on. But here's the thing, this wasn't just another boring government vote. This bill decides how your tax dollars get spent for the rest of this fiscal year. It affects everything from your local hospital to border security to whether new technology in your car could give someone else control over it. And most people have no idea what actually happened. So let's fix that. Today, we're going to break down this massive spending package in plain English. No political jargon, no confusing terms. Just straight talk about where $1.2 trillion is going and why some of these decisions matter way more than you might think. What actually happened? On January 22, 2026, the House of Representatives approved the final portions of the federal budget. This money keeps the government running until September 30th. Without this approval, we would have faced another government shutdown by the end of January. Now, you might be thinking they passed one giant bill. Not quite. Congress split everything into 2 separate packages. The first one, pretty much everyone agreed on it. Republicans and Democrats voted yes together. The second package? That one barely passed and caused a major split among Democrats themselves. Put them both together, and you've got the complete federal spending plan for this year. Let's talk numbers. Where's the money going? The total comes to roughly $1.2 trillion. That's trillion with a T. To put that in perspective, if you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you over 3,200 years to spend that much money. So where does it all go? Let's break it down category by category. Defense gets the biggest slice. The Pentagon received about $839 billion. That's roughly 70% of this entire package. Here's what that money covers. Military personnel are getting a 3.8% pay raise. If you're in the armed forces or know someone who is, that's directly affecting their paycheck. The funding also goes toward purchasing new weapons systems, building naval ships, developing missile defense technology, and improving training facilities and programs. There's also money for ongoing military operations around the world. People who support this level of defense spending say it's absolutely necessary. They argue that global threats are real and America needs to maintain military readiness. On the flip side, critics point out that defense budgets keep growing year after year, while programs that help regular Americans often get cut or frozen. But here's what's interesting. Defense spending wasn't even the most controversial part of this vote. That surprise is coming later. Health and Education Funding Congress allocated approximately $195 billion for health, education, and labor programs. This is where things get personal for many Americans. The National Institutes of Health actually got a funding increase. That's the agency responsible for medical research that could one day cure diseases affecting you or your family. The Centers for Disease Control also avoided the deep budget cuts that were proposed earlier. Remember, this is the agency that tracks disease outbreaks and keeps us safe from public health emergencies. The money also supports mental health services across the country, programs fighting opioid addiction, childcare assistance for working families, and education programs, including Pell Grants that help students afford college. Here's something worth noting. Earlier versions of this bill wanted to make massive cuts to public health agencies. Those cuts got rejected. Many people think that's one reason the bill managed to pass, but even that wasn't the main fight. Transportation and housing, about $13 billion went to transportation and housing programs. This covers the people who manage air traffic and keep your flights safe, highway maintenance and construction, public transportation systems in cities, financial assistance for rent, and housing programs specifically for senior citizens. These might not sound exciting, but imagine if they weren't funded. Airports would face chaos, roads would crumble faster, more people would struggle to afford housing. These programs are the invisible backbone that keeps daily life functioning smoothly. Still, this wasn't where the real battle happened either. The real fight, Homeland Security. Here's where things got intense. The Department of Homeland Security bill passed by just 13 votes, 220 to 207. This was one of the closest votes all year. Most Democrats voted against it. Why? One word: ICE. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has been under heavy scrutiny lately, especially after a fatal shooting of a U.S. citizen in Minneapolis. Democratic leaders wanted accountability, they wanted restrictions, they wanted oversight, and they felt this bill didn't provide enough of any of that. The bill kept ICE funding at basically the same level instead of cutting it. Democratic leaders argued this was the wrong move. They said Congress missed an opportunity to impose real consequences and stronger controls on the agency. But here's where it gets complicated. The vote that split a party, Republican leaders, had a straightforward argument: keep Homeland Security funded or risk chaos. With a shutdown deadline approaching, they said cutting ICE funding would cripple border enforcement and disrupt essential operations. Democrats saw it completely differently. After recent enforcement controversies, they wanted accountability measures built into the funding. They wanted restrictions on how ICE operates. They wanted tougher oversight requirements. What made this vote unusual is that some Democrats broke ranks. Even though their party leadership opposed the bill, these members voted yes anyway. Why? They were worried about three things: preventing a government shutdown, keeping other Homeland Security agencies operational, and avoiding disruption to services Americans depend on. At the same time, and this is wild, some Democrats who actually helped negotiate this overall spending deal still voted no on the Homeland Security portion. They wanted to send a message about ICE funding. This wasn't about Republicans versus Democrats. It was about competing priorities, political calculations, and timing pressure all colliding at once. What did Homeland Security actually get? Let's be clear about something. This wasn't a blank check to Homeland Security. The bill included some important details: $20 million specifically for body cameras for ICE agents. That's supposed to increase transparency and accountability. There were also reductions in enforcement and detention funding compared to earlier proposals, new requirements forcing Homeland Security to report how it spends money, and cuts to the budget for the Secretary's administrative office. Republicans called this a compromise: fund the agency but add oversight mechanisms. Democrats said it didn't go nearly far enough. That's exactly why Homeland Security got voted on separately from everything else. The amendment. Everyone's talking about now. Let's get to the part that exploded online. Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky introduced an amendment that got people seriously worried. The amendment would have blocked federal money from being used to implement a vehicle safety rule that's already written into law. This rule comes from the 2021 infrastructure bill and requires the government to create standards for technology that prevents impaired driving. Sounds reasonable, right? Technology that stops drunk drivers could save lives. But here's why people are concerned. Some fear this technology could eventually work like a kill switch. Imagine driving down the highway and someone remotely shuts off your car. Supporters of Massie's amendment warned this could become reality. Critics say that's not what the rule is about at all. They insist it's designed to prevent drunk driving, not give police or government officials remote control over your vehicle. Still, legitimate questions remain. What happens if the technology makes a mistake and shuts off your car when you're not impaired? Who controls this technology? What happens to your data? Could this rule expand beyond its original purpose? What the House decided. The House voted on Massie's amendment. It failed. The effort to block funding didn't get enough support. Let me be crystal clear about what this means. The House did not vote to create a new power to remotely shut off your car. What they did was refuse to stop funding for developing the safety standards. The rule still has to go through more regulatory processes, but the funding stays in place. This issue isn't going away. The concerns are real, and people are paying attention. The quiet changes. Nobody noticed. While everyone focused on the big fights, Congress quietly included several other provisions. They repealed a law that allowed certain senators to sue the government over phone records seized related to January 6th. They extended programs that were about to expire, including flood insurance that protects millions of homeowners, and they completed all 12 spending bills required for the year, which prevents a shutdown. These didn't make headlines, but they matter to real people. This isn't over yet. Even though the House passed everything, we're not done. The Senate still needs to approve this package. If they reject it or make changes the House won't accept, we could still face a government shutdown. The deadline is the end of January. Without an agreement, funding expires and federal agencies start closing down. That's why the pressure is so intense right now and why this vote happened when it did. What does this all mean? This vote revealed a lot about how Congress operates. It showed us which programs lawmakers consider essential and which ones they're willing to fight over. It demonstrated that controversial policies can quietly survive when blocking amendments fail. And it proved that massive policy decisions often happen through funding bills rather than through public debate. The government stays open. Health programs continue. Defense spending increases. ICE funding remains despite opposition. And debates about technology, privacy, and government power continue without resolution. So here's the real question worth asking. Does this $1.2 trillion spending package actually reflect what everyday Americans need right now? Or is Washington still arguing over the wrong priorities while the financial pressure on regular families keeps building? Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about big numbers and political fights. It's about how your tax dollars get spent and whether those decisions make your life better or not.